Hello, I'm Charles Moffat, and this is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And today, we're going to be doing a new style video for my YouTube channel called Critical Eye of Beloved Classics. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some criticisms of a classic book, like The Hobbit in this case, and we're going to talk about what things people actually have to complain about when it comes to a book that is otherwise one of the most admired fantasy books that you can actually come across. So, what do we actually are talking about? Well, let's start with the first one. While The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien is indeed... Oh, sorry. That's just a little thing that ChatGPT pumped out. Ignore that. Simplistic writing style. There we go. Some readers find Tolkien's writing style in The Hobbit to be more childlike and simplistic compared to his later works like The Lord of the Rings. Now, to be fair, this is a children's book. Like, saying it that it's childlike and simplistic is not really fair, because this is a children's book. It's designed as a book to be read by the parents to a child while, at bedtime, basically. That's when you're supposed to read this book. That's what it's meant for. You're supposed to be like, get the kid in his pajamas, stick him in bed, and then start reading the book to them. And then eventually they fall asleep. And the next, day you do it again, except maybe you're reading a different chapter. And you read chapter after chapter until the book is done. Sometimes you might get lucky, or unlucky as the case may be, and you might read multiple chapters in one night. Yeah, that's what this is. It's a children's book. So I feel like that's not really a valid criticism. Now, it says lack of depth. Critics argue that the characters in The Hobbit lack the depth and complexity found in Tolkien's later novels, making it harder to emotionally connect with them. Well, there are certainly characters within the story that you don't really get to, know that much about them. There's a whole bunch of different dwarves, and I'll be honest, I can't name them all right now. I do good to remember the 7 dwarves from Snow White. Let alone a whole bunch of different dwarves from this one. Okay. Was it 12 dwarves? 13 dwarves? I can't remember. It's an unlucky number, as I seem to call. Okay. So. And again, if it's a childish book, there's not going to be a lot of depth to some of the characters, because it's not necessarily held up to the same standard that a book geared towards adults would be. Okay? So, inconsistent tone. The book shifts between lighter, more whimsical moments and darker, more serious ones, which can be jarring for some reasons. Okay, so, yeah, there are indeed characters in here like Tom Bombadil. Anyway, so yeah, Tom Bombadil is kind of one of those silly characters that if this book was made today, the editor would probably say, yeah, you need to this character needs to go. We don't want this character in the book. He's too silly. And J.R.R. Tolkien would be like, no, I'm putting my foot down. I want him in the book. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. If this book was made today, he probably would not be in there. Which makes you wonder, what books are made today that have silly characters like that just then never see the light of day because the editor said, yeah, please don't put this character in the book. The character's too silly. And I'm trying to think of, characters maybe from Harry Potter that, were borderline, they just managed to get in there barely. Characters like Luna Lovegood, or maybe other interesting characters, which I won't get into. Anyway, so, and they just decided, well, okay, those ones are staying, but this other guy, yeah, he's got to go. And so it makes you wonder what characters did not appear in the final draft. Okay, but let's back to this point, this idea of a jarring in between these darker and more whimsical things. I understand that criticism. And perhaps this one is one of those ones that actually is a valid criticism. Because there is the Tom Bombadil scenes, but there's also these very darker scenes with the dragon destroying things. Very large things. No spoilers here. If you've read the book or seen the movies, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So, yeah, there's that, I suppose. And this might explain why in the movie versions they decided to get rid of Tom Bombadil and certain other characters, and they just got rid of them entirely. You don't have to worry about them because maybe those characters didn't fit the tone of the films, and yet they stayed in the books because Tolkien was enough of a bully, shall we say, almost. He managed to bully his editors and to be like, yeah, we're doing this. Like, there's a lovely story about, like, the spelling of dwarves with V-E-S on the end. And the editor said, like, oh, this isn't spelled properly according to the Oxford Dictionary. And Tolkien wrote them back and be like, yeah, who do you think wrote that dictionary? Just deal with it. Okay, so, possibly a valid point. Okay. Limited world building. Compared to The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit offers less intricate world building and a narrower focus on Middle-earth. Okay, well, that is to some extent true, but I don't see that as a big complaint. There is something to be said for having a sandbox world, as far as that goes. If the world is too big and you're talking about all this extra miscellaneous stuff that's not actually relevant to the plot, then you are adding all of this extra fluff that ends up, if it's irrelevant to the plot, it really doesn't even need to be there. So this idea that you need lots of world building, I don't think that's actually should be a thing. I think that's a little bit of bullshit. I think it's kind of a case of less is more. You don't need a giant lots of world building stuff because that stuff, like, it's boring and it bogs down the book if there's too much of it. What you want is a smaller sandbox style storytelling and world building so that it's more focused on the story at hand, and you can leave all that extra miscellaneous stuff for other books in the future, which obviously Tolkien did, when he, later came out with The Lord of the Rings and other books like Baran and Luthien, which he didn't actually finish, but whatever. Or Unfinished Tales, which is, as the name suggests, it was never finished. Okay, so underdeveloped female characters. Now, I get this one as well. There's not a lot of female characters in these books. You got a whole bunch of dwarves, one hobbit of note, one wizard of note, who's also male, and very few other characters that are, female. So it's almost none. So underdeveloped female characters. Some readers criticize the limited presence and development of female characters in the story, with only a brief mention of characters like Belladonna Took, who's, like, really, they just talk about her and you never actually see her. And then a single scene with the character Galadriel. You get more scenes with Galadriel in the next series books, but Galadriel in The Hobbit is basically just, she's barely there at all. Yeah. So, it's a valid point. There's not a lot of female characters. Maybe there should have been a few female dwarves in the mix, just to, liven it up a little bit, make it a little bit more interesting. Now, could have also been more, like maybe Bilbo could have had a female love interest. Something else could have been going on there. So there are, if somebody was to write, their variation on The Hobbit in the future, like a similar story, and you can't say that it hasn't been done already, because there's lots of people who have written similar stories to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings already. That is kind of like a whole genre by itself. Yeah. In those stories, some people are going to be like, yeah, I'm going to include more female characters or more other types of characters. I would like to see more characters with disabilities in, books. Okay. Okay, so single scene with Galadriel. Now, plot convenience. Critics argue that the plot often relies on convenient coincidences and sudden interventions to resolve conflicts, which can undermine the tension. Yes, There's a plane going over. It's pretty low. You know, honestly, this is something that kind of pops up in a lot of books. Harry Potter, for example, there will be a lot of circumstances where, like, oh, you know, so-and-so shows up and then fixes everything. Yeah, there's certain things just sort of conveniently happen in certain types of books. One of the ones, there's a book that I did a review on last year called Fire Drake, which particularly has this problem because the character would get captured and then rescued by a different character, which is super powerful, like a super powerful side character, and then he would get captured again, and then he would get rescued again by another super powerful character, and then he would get captured again, and then he would get rescued again, and then it just kept repeating itself, and then eventually, you know, it was like, oh, you know, this, by the way, this guy's like the reincarnation of his grandfather, so he has all of his grandfather's magical powers, but he didn't earn any of them. Okay, so I have issues with that book. When you make things too convenient, it just kind of like ruins the enjoyment of the book. Okay, so yeah, that is a problem. And it's also a problem with other books as well. Like Harry Potter, there's this issue of like, oh, by the way, here we go. We're going to give you a giant pile of gold, an invisibility cloak, a slightly more powerful wand than what everybody else has, because like we're going to give you this Phoenix wand. And oh, somebody just magically gives you a firebolt broom for you to zoom around on. It's just, I'm sorry, it's just, that's too much. There's too much. Stop giving the characters things that they don't need and haven't earned. Okay. Lack of moral ambiguity. Now, to be fair, Tolkien was originally writing The Hobbit for his children. And then as they got older, he wrote a more sophisticated story that was essentially aimed at, you know, like for his children, but also other people who might enjoy it as well. So he wrote something that's more adult-ish, but still, you know, this here was basically, you know, it's a children's story. You're not going to put a lot of moral ambiguity in a children's story. You want there to be moral lessons, as far as the story goes, but you don't want to be like endorsing your children to be like towards making bad moral decisions. Okay, so unlike the Lord of the Rings, where moral choices are complex, The Hobbit has a more straightforward black and white portrayal of good and evil. Yes, exactly. So, and that's what you want for a children's book. Because you want children to like kind of like get this idea like, okay, this is good and there's evil, and you have to make a moral choice. Lord of the Rings, it's not so simple, because you know you're talking to adults more, and adults know that like sometimes like there's a little more gray in the middle, and you have to, you know, fudge your way through it to just, you know, find the right thing to do. Okay. Morality is a sliding scale in real life, but for children, when you're trying to teach them morality, you need to make it a little bit black and white, just so they can like understand it easier. Okay, retcons and inconsistencies. Okay, Tolkien made revisions to The Hobbit to align it with The Lord of the Rings, which has led to inconsistency and retcons that some readers find distracting. Honestly, I didn't notice this. You would have to show me like the original version of The Hobbit, and then show me all the stuff that was retconned and changed, so that I can understand what you're talking about in terms of inconsistencies. I honestly don't see that here, but you know, some people might be into that sort of thing. If you want to read a book where you can talk about like inconsistencies, get this one. There you go. Because this one, there's just so much in here that is just sort of like, yeah, it's just problematic. This book was not finished by Tolkien himself. His son Christopher basically finished the rest of it with help from various other people, and tried to make it like, this is just a good chunk of this is poetry. And you know, what looks like letters and things like that. It's just, and then you get these little like notes down here A later version of the story concerning the Naglamir told that it had been made by the craftsmen of the dwarves long before for Felagund. Okay, so what this is happening here is this is an unfinished version of the book that J.R.R. Tolkien never finished himself, and there's all these sort of like different variations on what was actually supposed to happen, and this final piece here is basically the lumped together pieces of the unfinished book. Like parts of it look finished, as far as that goes. But then there's other parts of it that you're just going like, okay, this feels more like poetry. Okay? And there's, you know, like bits and pieces all cobbled together. And then they tried to like edit it and try to make improvements to it. But really, this is kind of like a convoluted mess, you know? If somebody wanted to make a version of this in the future, you know, obviously you'd have to change the setting, the names of the characters and everything. That would be interesting to read, where it's actually a proper finished version of the book. Okay? None of this like cobbled together business. Okay? It's really kind of a case of like Robert Jordan. Robert Jordan wrote this huge, long, big series of books called The Wheel of Time. And then he died. And he didn't finish the series. And then they hired Brandon Sanderson to finish the series. And that's probably what they really should have done. They should not have used Christopher Tolkien to do this. They should have hired somebody else who can write in a similar manner to Tolkien to finish the stories in a logical, consistent manner that follows like his notes, and to just choose like here and there to like, you know, okay, which ways should we go with this? So finish the story that way, as opposed to this cobbled together nonsense. Anyway, off topic. Yeah, I should do one on I should do one of these critical eye of beloved classics about this book, but it's not a beloved classic. That's the problem with this book. Not a lot of people actually like this book or read this book. The beloved classics are The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, as far as that goes. There we go. Yeah, these are the beloved classics that people actually want to read. Okay, complete with, in my case, the One Ring. This is actually my wife's copies of these books. Yeah, these are hers. But, you know, hers, you know, look pretty good, and they come with the ring. Yeah. But, you know, these are beloved classics for a reason. Okay, ignoring that one. They are very well written books, despite the criticisms. And a lot of people really enjoy these books. And they set this whole standard for decades after these books came out, and created like essentially a whole genre of books that feature dwarves, elves, and to a lesser extent gnomes and halflings and things like that. Like Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms, Dungeons and Dragons, all these different things are based off Tolkien's work. These are extremely influential books. Okay? And that's why it's a beloved classic. Okay? A lot of people really like these books, and they just keep coming back to them. I am looking forward to reading this to my son when he's older, specifically when he's old enough to appreciate me reading to him late at night. Because at this point, he just wants to play Minecraft and watch Top Gear and the Grand Tour, which I admit, those aren't always appropriate for a 6-year-old, but you know, that's what he wants to watch. He wants to watch stuff with cars in it, or Minecraft. You know, that's what he's into. Or Super Mario Brothers. You know, at least Super Mario Brothers is more, you know, appropriate for his age. All right. So, a lot of the criticisms here, that's what this comes down to. This is a children's book. Okay? People are basically like, oh, I don't like it because it's a children's book. Yes, okay. And a lot of people that complain about the movies, it's the same thing. They're like, oh, it's a children's book. And they turned one tiny, relatively tiny children's book into a 3-part movie series. That was actually pretty impressive that they managed to do that. Yes, they cut out things like Tom Bombadil, but honestly, are you really sad that they cut out Tom Bombadil, or are you just like finding something to complain about? Yeah. Anyway, that is my inaugural episode of Critical Eye of Beloved Classics, featuring The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And if you want some modern books that you can go read, you should go check out amazon.com/author/Moffat, where you'll find my books that you can go read. Okay, and at some point in the future, I'll be doing a book review on Brana Luthien, and I'm kind of going to guarantee right now there's going to be some negative parts to the review just because of how badly cobbled together this book is. Anyway, see you next time. I'm Charles Moffat. Bye-bye.